This is the Construction Leading Edge podcast from constructionleadingedge.com. My name is Todd DeWalt, and here at Construction Leading Edge, we are all about helping construction business owners create a business that generates freedom, impact, and wealth. We're all about systematizing your construction business to eliminate chaos and profit bleed. Let me ask you a question. How do you know if you're getting overcharged for your workers' comp premiums? What if you're one of the surprising number of construction businesses who are being wrongfully overcharged by insurance companies? So here's the disclaimer. If you are 100% happy with the checks that you're writing for workers' comp and you just feel great about how much you're paying, you should probably skip this episode. Here's what you're going to learn about as we pull back the curtains on the inner workings of workers' comp, how you could be overpaying, the threats, the risks of not understanding how workers' comp works, and what to do about it. Here's what you're going to learn from attorney and workers' comp overpayment recovery specialist Scott Priz. There's a 30% chance you're getting overcharged for workers' comp and what to do about it. You'll hear about what a shock audit can look like and how it has bankrupted some businesses because of simple mistakes on their end, on the other end. There are some pitfalls to watch out for that can create gigantic increases in your workers' comp premiums. Scott talks about how insufficient documents open the door to insurance companies doing whatever they want. There are some red flags to watch out for that you could be getting overcharged. Scott shares the two most common reasons contractors get overcharged, the biggest errors made during an audit that you need to know about and watch out for. There are a few things that your insurance company is allowed to do to you if you don't cooperate during an audit, the importance of your experience modification factor, and how you can get it lowered. And one way your experience modification factor can prevent you from bidding on work, and in extreme cases, it could put you out of business. And most importantly, how you can find out if you're getting overcharged and how to get your hard-earned money back. This one is worth a listen. So be sure to listen to this. And if you are interested, if you think you might be getting overcharged or you want to find out if you're getting overcharged, then go to constructionleadingedge.com/recover. Fill out the form. We'll put you in touch with Scott Priz, workers' comp overpayment recovery specialist, and a couple of tax credit overpayment recovery specialists as well. So a couple of resources I want to share with you before we get into that interview with Scott. If you own a construction business, I want you to imagine this. Imagine this scenario. You have a plan and a design for your business 2 years in the future. Your team has clearly defined roles and responsibilities today, and everyone knows what lane they're in. Your team is nailing the handoff from the office to the field, and your field teams have everything they need to finish instead of just having just enough to start. Your financial systems are dialed in. Your pricing work profitably, and you understand the story that your financial reports are telling you. Your team is solving problems quickly with fewer mistakes and without you. Your phone is ringing a lot less with questions and fewer problems are landing in your lap. You're spending less time sorting through hundreds of emails or messages every day. That means you have time to think, to operate strategically, to be proactive. Maybe it's to go sell or to go work on another business venture or work on your business. You're present when you're at home with your spouse and your kids, and you have time for vacations. And then when you come back from vacation, you don't have to worry about what's waiting for you. How would you describe what that would feel like in one word? Think about it. What is one word you would use to describe how that would feel like? Think about it. What would that be like? Well, if you want to join the growing number of construction business owners we're working with to achieve those exact outcomes, then here are the first few steps. First, go to constructionleadingedge.com/apply, APPLY. Read about who our best fit clients are, and then if it makes sense, fill out a short form on that page. Our team will review that form, And if it looks like there's a good mutual fit, we'll contact you to schedule a strategy call. On that call, we'll assess where you're at, where you want to be, some options for how to help you get there. And if it looks like there's a good mutual fit, we'll talk about what working with us looks like. The first step is to go to constructionleadingedge.com/apply. That's constructionleadingedge.com/APPLY. Are you tired of chasing down field reports? Raken's easy-to-use software helps you connect the field to the office. That way, you get the progress updates you need without wasting hours on the job. With Raken's mobile app, field crews can share updates as they build. Everything from daily reports, time-stamped photos and notes, to time cards, checklists, and production data. All that field data is turned into a professional, branded PDF report, making it easy to see and share how a project is going. With Raken's web dashboard, the office can track projects in real time and find actionable insights to improve them. Give your field crews an app they'll actually use and get the data you need to build better projects. To learn more, go to rakenapp.com. That's RAKENAPP.com. Now, let's pull back the curtains on the inner workings of the workers' comp world. And here's my interview with Scott Priz. Scott Priz, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. So let's jump into this. This is what we really want to talk about, which is an interesting statistic I've seen that says on the low end, 25 to 30% of small businesses are overcharged. They're overpaying on their workers' comp insurance. So every year they're paying too much, paying more than they should for their workers' comp. And I talked to a lot of construction business owners, and after you and I connected, I started asking them, like, how do you feel about the amount you're paying for workers' comp? And I heard some colorful language in response to that. And I can tell you, exactly 0% of them said, you know what, I feel real good about the checks I'm writing. I feel really good about that last audit. I feel really good about what's going on with my workers' comp. So first of all, is that statistic of a quarter to around a third of businesses are paying too much, is that accurate? And if so, how does that happen?
So it is accurate, and it can be higher in certain types of business. Probably the construction industry has a higher rate of error just because it's a more complicated type of policy than, say, a law firm or a clerical company. But that is an accurate figure. And the reason for it is that, unlike most other types of insurance, workers' comp is intensely regulated with very complicated manuals and rules. And it's run on a state-by-state basis, although 33 states run through NCCI, but even NCCI states have their own state specials for all of them. It's not as though insurance carriers are malevolent and trying to, and purposely doing this. It's just that the system is complicated enough, and there's certain incentives built into the system whereby if you don't catch something, they're allowed to charge you. Otherwise, you can fix that later on. I guess the answer is that it's a there's a bunch of reasons, but it's a very complicated system. Insurance carriers are now almost universally outsourcing their auditors to not terribly greatly trained third-party auditors who make these decisions. And so you have the situation where neither the auditor nor typically the actual policy owner knows the rules very well. Most agents aren't trained in it either. There are a few that are really good at it, but by and large, agents aren't trained in it. And I think the reason is that you've got a fairly complicated system, and most of the parties that are engaging in the system, policyholder, auditors, agents, are just not terribly versed in the nuances of that system. And so things go wrong a lot because of that. And that's the short answer is complicated system, and nobody is that well, not many people are well trained and the various nuances of it.
You mentioned that there are some incentives built into the system. What do you mean by incentives?
Well, so when you got an auditor, and I should, most auditors, they're just paid by the auditor, not like they're paid like generally a percentage of whatever premium they have. But it is sort of, it's a good thing to find all additional premiums. And I guess incentives isn't the right word. I suppose the system sort of, if you're not careful, particularly as a construction company, and I'll get into this a little bit more later on, I guess there are pitfalls that if your records aren't quite right, or if you haven't kept the certificates of insurance, that can suddenly create gigantic increases in premiums that they're usually reversible if you know what you're doing. But if you don't, it can just suddenly, end up with a six-figure bill because the auditor didn't ask you for the right document. And if they don't have something, then they're allowed to just charge you for it. Now, I'll go into more detail on the sort of pitfalls that can happen in a premium audit, especially for construction companies. But it's more of if many of the auditing rules are such that if you don't have everything in order, insurance carriers are allowed to make assumptions, and they're allowed to charge you for things that they wouldn't be if you gave them reason to not make those assumptions, we'll say.
Gotcha. So it sounds like there's a lot going on behind the scenes with workers' comp. I've heard a few things that most people may not be aware of. One, that there are third-party auditors. It's a very complex system, but what are some of the other things going on, or some of the main things going on behind the scenes with workers' comp that most construction business owners don't know about, but they should?
A bunch of things. So the first thing is that I mentioned this before, most agents just aren't trained in this. And so if you have a problem with your policy, the first person you're going to turn to is your insurance agent. And again, most of them they're not well trained. Some of them are. Some have, the certifications, CPCU, APA, but that's pretty rare. And so the first thing is that insurance agents are just not well trained in this and will have great difficulty navigating the insurance appeals process. There's a specific appeals process that you'll be in trouble. And the other thing is that there is an insurance appeals process, a dispute resolution process in most states. All NCCI states, which is 33, and a lot of the other individual bureaus also have a dispute resolution process that's informal. And if you have a dispute with your work comp carrier, you can go to that, and you don't need to pay a lawyer to go there. It's a 20-minute hearing in front of insurance professionals. And if you think your insurance carrier is overcharging you somewhere, if you think your classification code is wrong, you can go through that process and get a neutral party to see if you actually have a valid dispute or if you're right. And then if you lose there, you can then go to the various states' departments of insurance to have a sort of experienced administrative party take a look at your dispute. The other thing I'd say is that the way that most premium estimates are done, in terms of you get your policy and they got a premium estimate there, most underwriters, when they give you that number, they're interested in the final premium number rather than so much how that came to pass. They'll look at your loss ratio and they'll see, sort of what work you're in, and they'll use scheduled credits and debits to get to the final premium number that they want as underwriters. And so that'll set up the rules for the policy, and a lot of those are set as sort of the premium figure they want to get to. And then come the audit, they'll use that setup of the policy, but all sorts of things can go wrong with the audit. It's based on the rules of the policy that were set up by the underwriter at policy inception. But come audit time, all bets are off, and you can end up with a gigantic bill because of what happens in that audit. And the underwriter, who sort of, had a premium estimate that we wanted to get to, won't really care very much what the estimate was come audit time. If there's a $100,000 bill and that bill is in accordance with the manual rules, they're going to want you to pay it.
Hmm. Yeah, so we're going to get into some of the indicators that you might be getting overcharged, some common errors when an audit comes around. But let's talk about your background. What's a nice guy like you doing in this business? What's your background, and
Sure.
how did you get into this line of work?
So it's actually a family business. My father has been doing this since, well, he started off as an agent and an underwriter, going all the way back to the 1970s. And then he founded the business, Advanced Insurance Management, in 1988 when I was but 7 years old. After college, I was in need of work, and I sort of got into the family business. And I've been doing that for 19 years now. Additionally, I'm a licensed attorney here in Illinois. And so I do not only the consulting work with Advanced Insurance Management, but I'm also an attorney with my own firm. I do a lot of this work as well because it's what I know, and most attorneys, like most insurance agents, don't know this area particularly well. And so I can now help clients both as a consultant, but also if needs be, and God forbid, if they need legal assistance in this area. So they're being sued by an insurance carrier, typically for a large sum of money. In the state of Illinois, I can help myself, or if it's in a different state, I can pair up with another lawyer and help them in that way.
Gotcha. So you have the unique job of helping people get money back on their workers' comp overpayments, which we'll talk about that before we wrap up. Sounds like a lot of people, a third at least on average, are overpaying for workers' comp. What are some indicators that somebody might be getting overcharged?
So honestly, there are a lot of overcharges that are just happening and there aren't any signs of it. As long as you have enough premium, usually above $30,000 per year, there's a good chance there's a mistake in there. Because once you get to that premium level, the policies get complicated enough that an error is likely to occur. There are certain other things, though, that, sort of big red flags. One of them is if midterm, your insurance carrier changed the classification code, either of the overall business or the construction company, of a type of work that you're doing. Another one is if your experience modification has suddenly raised, or if your renewal of your policy, your premium has suddenly jumped up without too much explanation. Sometimes there's an explanation that you had some bad losses and your experience mod went up. But I'd say three of the big red flags are if your classification code has changed, if midterm your experience mod has changed, or if suddenly your premium has shot up from 1 year to the next. Although mistakes are common enough that if you have enough, usually about above $30,000 per year in premium, there's a good chance you're being overcharged. So I want to look at it as that, like everyone, there's a decent risk, but there are certain events that suggest very seriously, yes, you're being overcharged, and it's reviewed as bright red flags.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the mistakes or oversights that construction business owners could be making that lead them to be overcharged? Things that they're doing or things they are not doing that could be leading to these overcharges?
Okay. The most common mistake of construction companies is not keeping track of what type of work your employees are doing. The audit rules are such that if you don't keep track, and the sort of best way to do it is daily time cards of each employee in each type of duty, because the rules state that they don't have a way of keeping track of what everyone was doing. And if you give them like estimates, they are allowed to charge the most expensive code for whatever that employee was doing. And so it happens a lot where in construction companies don't keep the best records, or they have to try to recreate it based upon their invoices and sort of what each person was doing. But the audits go a lot easier if you have a spreadsheet that says, okay, on this day, this person was doing plumbing. On this day, he was doing pipe fitting. On this day, he was doing insulation work or whatever it is the construction company is doing. But if you don't keep those records and you keep them contemporaneously, that can lead to a lot of pain in the audit. The other big area that really hits a lot of construction companies, and this is very difficult for me to help them with, is if they don't hire subcontractors that have certificates of insurance. This is one of the most common calls that I get, is that someone has decided to sub out all of their work, and they subbed it out to small businesses, oftentimes just a solo shop of a company. And if they don't have a policy of their own, they're going to get picked up under your workers' compensation policy. And this can lead to absolute nightmare situations. I've had people call me that have $600,000 bills, going out of business type bills from an insurance carrier. And worse yet, some of them are legitimate. If you sub out all of your work to people that don't have insurance and you have your own policy, that can lead to a lot of trouble down the road. And that's the most common issue that leads to very, very large audit bills. Now, sometimes we can help them, or we can reduce that big bill. We can find out if those subs were charging the general contractor for expenses, or if some of them did have certificates. And sometimes that's sort of a mad search through the records to get the certificates, so that they can get that payroll removed. I can give you a case example if you'd like that.
Sure, absolutely.
So there's a construction company that did work with some subcontractors for various concrete work and various contracting work. The insurance company looked through their books and saw the payments of these companies, and the auditor didn't ask if those companies had certificates of insurance or not. And so the insurer didn't provide them because they were never asked. They didn't know. And the insurance company then put $2 million worth of payroll on the audit and had $120,000 bill from these companies. Now, that was solvable. They just didn't ask. And so we went back to these companies that had their own insurance and found all the certificates and got that bill removed. But in this sort of situation where the auditor wasn't being careful, the insurer didn't know about it, and the agent really wasn't helping them on it. And so this bill came out of nowhere, and they were being hit with this gigantic audit bill that really just some paperwork cleared up. And that's, sometimes we can clear that up, and sometimes it's legitimate because if those subcontractors don't have their own insurance, the general contractor is going to be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. So two things I heard you say. One would be there are some systems you can put in place.
Mm-hmm.
Time tracking systems like Busy, QuickBooks Time, which
Mm-hmm.
used to be T-Sheets, Co-Construct time tracking, have hourly tracking.
Mm-hmm.
Not only for tracking, there's a lot of reasons to track time. And a really good one is, let's say if you are doing roofing and general labor work, or roofing versus superintendent type work,
Mm-hmm.
what I'm hearing you say is by default, they're going to lump 100% of the time into the highest risk classification.
That's exactly right. And that happens a lot with executive supervisors. 5606 is a classification code. If you don't point that out and really prove it to the insurance auditor, they're going to put those guys into the more expensive construction code. And so keeping track of all of that will save you a lot of pain at the audit, because it's really quite difficult to create those records based on what you have if you weren't doing it as you went. And so it's very, very important for construction companies to keep track of it contemporaneously.
Yeah. So track hours. if for no other reason, for this reason. And then
Yes.
second is to have a system in place and use legitimate subcontractors. And there are a couple of problems here. I think a lot of people use 1099 subcontractors. They really, according to the federal government and probably according to an insurance company, they're employees. But you're treating them as a subcontractor, which is opening a door to Pandora's box, quite frankly, for workers' comp. Also, general liability is the same way. If they don't have general liability insurance, there are just all sorts of issues that we could tell nightmare stories, probably from automobile policies, workers' comp, general liability, healthcare issues. So have a process in place. Make sure your subs are legitimate. You have subcontract agreements, and you are getting their COIs, their certificates of insurance. In a good policy is don't pay them unless you have an up-to-date certificate of insurance. So
yes. It's even worse in workers' comp purposes for contractors than it is in terms of determining employment relationships for taxation purposes. Under the rules here in Illinois, for contractors, if they are a subcontractor, they are automatically picked up by your work comp policy. Employee, whether they're a genuine independent business or not, they're automatically picked up on your work comp policy unless they have a certificate of insurance. So in terms of that sort of analysis that the government uses for taxation purposes, or the 1099 W-2, if you're a contractor, that does not matter. In a lot of states like Illinois, all that matters is, are they a subcontractor, and do they have a certificate of insurance or not? Because if they don't, even if they're a licensed independent company, they don't have the certificate, they're being picked up for your workers' comp premium purposes.
So let's talk about the audit process. What are some of the most common errors made during a workers' comp premium audit?
Okay. The biggest one is classification of your employees. For construction companies, it's keeping track of what they're doing. But even if you do that, the auditor or the underwriter might have just made a classification code mistake. So if the manuals are complicated and the construction classification code system is especially complicated, and you really want to have a professional look at all the codes and make sure that it's being properly done, especially if you're doing a bunch of different types of construction work. But the big one is always classification codes of your employees. Everything else is fairly minor compared to that. They want to make sure that not only is the overall classification codes correct, but that all of the employees are being allocated correctly between the various classification codes. With construction codes, if you have an employee that does 5 different types of construction work, they can be put into all 5 different codes so long as you keep track of it. And that means also you've got to make sure that all 5 codes are correct for those different types of work. You want to make sure, of course, that you're getting credited for overtime. You won't get it unless you have the records available. Again, the default mode of the system is if the records aren't available, you don't get credit for it. They're allowed to put them into the worst case scenario for that employee. So if you don't have overtime records and you just have an estimate, you won't get credit for it. So you need to have all these records and have all of it put together. One of the also more common things that happens to companies is they decide not to cooperate with the audit. And that's almost always a mistake because insurance carriers are allowed to do an estimated audit. And what they can do with an estimated audit is going to vary policy by policy and state by state, but the consequences can be pretty bad. On most policies, they're going to be allowed to charge 2 or maybe 3 times the estimated premium if you don't cooperate with them. In California, if it's an estimated audit, they will simply not report the estimated payroll, to the rating bureau. And for that year, you'll have $0 for the payroll, but your losses will count. And so you see a lot of companies that, for one reason or another, don't cooperate fully with the insurance audit. Maybe sometimes they think that the insurance company is asking for too many documents, but they have a very broad amount of documents they can ask for. They can ask for all your financials, they can ask for your bank statements, profit and loss statements, tax records, all of that. And if you don't cooperate, bad things can happen. And they're allowed to do that under the rules to sort of incentivize companies to cooperate with those audits.
Mm. Let's talk about the experience modification factor and how it relates to workers' comp premiums. What is the XMOD, and how is it determined? Why does it matter?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the experience mod is produced by the rating bureau in each state. And what it is meant to do is to reward companies that have a good loss history and to punish companies that have a bad loss history. And it can really spiral out of control for companies. But at its core, all that it's doing is it's comparing what your expected losses should be based on your payroll and classification codes against what your actual losses have been in the past. And there's a look back period. It's, say you have a 2022 policy, it will have your 2018, your 2019, and your 2020 data on there. It'll skip a year to let the claims develop. And that will produce your experience mod. And you will get a factor that will multiply your premium by it. So if you have good losses and you got an 80% experience mod, you'll get a 20% discount. Great. On the other hand, and it's real easy for a small, medium-sized company for their experience mod to get out of control. If you have, say, a 130 experience mod, you will get a 30% surcharge. And it can get worse. If you have a bad experience mod, you're much more likely to be placed in what's known as the assigned risk pool. In NCCI states, that means you're going to have the highest rates, and those rates will be multiplied by your bad experience mod. Worse yet, in a lot of NCCI states, there's an additional surcharge in the assigned risk plan if your mod is over 1. It's known as the ARAP charge, ARAP. And that'll be a second multiplicative factor right on top of the bad experience mod. So if your experience mod gets out of hand, if you have an experience mod of like 150, you'll likely be assigned to the assigned risk plan. You have the 50% surcharge, and you have an ARAP charge on top of that, which can double, or altogether, it can double or triple your cost for workers' comp. And I've seen it put people out of business if it gets completely out of hand. And they do it as a means of incentivizing companies to have safe workplaces. And their means of incentivization is almost always punitive measures. There's some benefits if you have a good experience mod. But in my experience, when everything sort of stacks on top of each other with the assigned risk rates, experience mod, and the ARAP factors, it really can be quite punitive in terms of developing your workers' comp premiums. It can turn into a nightmare.
There we go. How can a company get their experience modification factor lowered, if at all?
It's sometimes possible. There's a bunch of things you can do. And this is really important for a lot of construction companies because a lot of contracts, if you're acting as like a subcontractor, if you're doing work with the government, they will not allow you to bid unless your experience mod is beneath a certain amount. So sometimes if it's not beneath 1, or I've seen actually if it's not beneath 0.8. And it can be real hard because there's only certain circumstances that you can actually lower experience mods. Sometimes there'll be a bad claim, whereby a claim was eventually denied, and insurance carriers are bad at filing the paperwork to actually remove those bad claims. Sometimes there'll be a subrogated recovery on an owed claim, and that you can get reduced. But it can be tricky. Other times there are just mistakes made in there. Sometimes the insurance company will use bad payroll figures. Other times they'll not include all of the entities that should be on an experience modifier. One of the other ways you can try to do it is if there is common ownership between companies, and then you can try to combine them, but that can be dangerous because it could make the mod worse. You have to be very, very careful with that, but that can work. And the other way you can do it that you sort of do in cases of emergency is if it's really, really important, like it's going to put a company out of business because they can't get work. What we've done for some companies is we've gone back into the past and actually found mistakes that were in the insured's, in the policyholder's favor, and raised prior premiums to lower the experience mod, to basically increase their expected losses. That can be costly, but in case of emergency for a company, we've done it. So those are the typical ways, but it can be hard. And sometimes there is no way. If the claims are legitimate, if all the payroll is correct, there's no shared entities. Sometimes an experience mod is just right. And you have to sort of find some other way of keeping these companies in business. It can be very hard and very unfair because some claims are no one's fault. Because where comp is if it's just like a freak accident, okay, that still gets covered under your work comp claim. The same as if a policyholder actually was not, had an unsafe workplace. So like you have claims that we have like a salesman slipping in the shower of a sales trip, hurts his back, has an $80,000 claim. That's weird. And there's no way an employer could have really prevented that, but it counts just the same as claims that happen under an unsafe workplace. And it can really, really hurt companies. And sometimes there's just nothing you can do about it. Sometimes a bad claim is just a bad claim.
Yeah. If a business owner feels like they've been overcharged or wondering if they've been overcharged, can they get that money back?
Goodness, yes. That's what a company does. It depends on what state in terms of what the actual process is. It's sort of every state has their own thing. NCCI has it pretty systematized. But if you've been overcharged and you've got a real mistake, you can absolutely go back and get it corrected within certain time frames. But insurance carriers are bound under the policy to use the correct classification codes. And they say if they're not using the right codes, they will fix it. With experience mods, the rules are nice in that if it is in your favor and the mod should be lowered, they'll apply it. If there's a mistake that's not and they need to raise the experience mod, generally speaking, they cannot apply it, though there are a few exceptions to that. But the system is set up, I think, partially because they know insurance companies write and understand the rules, that if they make a mistake, they're going to fix that mistake and give the money back.
And what is that time frame? How far back can you go to recover overpayments?
Generally speaking, the rule is current and past 3 years. Some states are different than that. Like Pennsylvania, you can only add class codes to the current and past year. States like Illinois, you can go much further back. There was a few years back, there was a case where there was actually like 20 years old, the policy classification, and we were able to settle with the insurance company over it because Illinois is much more liberal in many ways because they have a statute that says if there's an overcharge, the insurance companies will give the money back. But those are the exceptions. For the most part, it's current and past 3 years The experience mods, you can fix current and past 2 years generally. Subrogate recovery is current and past 4 years. Those are in CCI states. But it varies state by state, but usually it's current and past 3 years.
Gotcha. Can you share some examples of construction businesses you've helped recover workers' comp overpayments?
Sure. There was one. So sometimes it's pretty straightforward. There was an Illinois construction company in which they were eligible for a contractor's credit, and they had not received it. It was the first 180 days of the policy. So we had the insured fill out a form, sent it in, and got a 40% credit on the current policy. Insurance company didn't really like that, but that's the rules. They were eligible for it, and so they received that credit.
And how much was that credit? We're talking about they received a check?
Yeah, because eventually the insurance company fought it till the audit happened. So they got a check back for somewhere in the range of $50,000 or so.
Okay.
Because it was a 40% credit on a fairly, they had about, $100,000, a little more of a premium per year. And so this was a pretty substantial credit. There's another case a few years back in which there was a small company and they were hit with a $600,000 bill for uninsured subcontractors. It was in the state of Pennsylvania. And I was actually able to this wasn't a recovery. This was I guess what we call a shock audit, whereby a company received a gigantic bill out of the blue. And in that case, we were actually able to remove all of the subcontractors and completely remove that $600,000 bill. I think they actually got like a $1,000 refund out of it. But they started off with a bill that was going to bankrupt them. And it ended up with a small refund. And that was a subcontractor issue. It was just getting the paperwork together, showing the insurance carrier what actually happened with their job sites and everything, and getting them to agree. This didn't take litigation. This was just writing some letters, explaining everything, and getting them to remove those subcontractors from the audit. More common are mistakes within classification codes, whereby you have employees that should be in a cheaper code than they are. One of the more common one is, I've mentioned this before, executive supervisors, and that's just getting these executive supervisors that qualify into code 5606. I have a client that probably got back $20,000 or so just by moving these fairly well-paid executives out of the general construction code. And a more recent example was a company that their entire payroll had been placed into code 5645 for their construction work. And they did all manner of things. And so the work was simply just getting everyone classified into the right code. That was in the state of Georgia, where the rate for 5645 in the assigned risk plan is 135% of your payroll. So just out of control costs in terms of the rates that the insurance carriers are allowed to charge. And it was just dividing and putting everything into the right codes, figuring out and showing the records to show that no, these companies really belong, these employees really belonged in 5 or 6 classification codes, not the incredibly expensive carpenter code that you put them in. That was a pretty good recovery. I think somewhere around $50,000 or so we got back for them, just by classifying everybody correctly. And the insurance carrier, once you justify it and show them the records, they will fix these mistakes. You just need to point it out to them.
So let's talk about what exactly do you do? What exactly does your firm do? Who do you help? What can you help? I guess the better question is, what can you help construction business owners with specifically? Sounds like it's several things, but just walk through the services you can provide construction business owners.
Sure. So at this point, there's basically 2 different types of clients that we typically get. The first is a sort of code review of their policies. In that case, we work just on a contingent basis. And we go in and review everything, review the audits, review the experience mods, review the classification codes, and we make sure that everything has been in order for typically the current and past 3 years. We review it, and if there's any overcharges, we make the insurance carriers give the money back. And that's always been our main focus of what we do, sort of go in cold and find mistakes. And there are enough mistakes that happen that we've been in business for over close to 35 years now. And so we're confident that in those sort of businesses, if we don't find anything, there's no charge. And that's just, so we're happy just to look at policies, look at all these documents, and see if there's anything there. See if we can find any credits, like the contractors credit that I mentioned. See if there's any classification code mistakes, and we'll just go in and review it. And if we don't find anything, no charge. The second type of client is, these typically call us, is when somebody's got a very large audit bill. They've got, they're a small construction company, and suddenly Liberty Mutual is coming after them for $130,000 or something. And in that case, there we just work usually on an hourly basis. We will defend them from these audit charges instead of going, sort of going on the offense to go up to insurance companies to get recoveries. In this case, the goal is to reduce the bill. A lot of times, and honestly, those are the most meaningful cases because there we're saving companies from bankruptcy, where an insurance carrier auditor is just oftentimes made a mistake, and we need to correct those mistakes and save those businesses from a six-figure bill from a gigantic insurance company. And that, we will work with, AIM is not a law firm, so it'll work within the insurance dispute resolution process to actually reduce those bills. So those are the two main types of clients that we have, sort of going in cold, looking for buried treasure. And the second one is when insurance companies after you, we'll try to reduce that bill that you're facing.
So if somebody's interested in working with you and they're like, I have a feeling that I'm getting screwed, or that term shock audit feels exactly like what just happened to me, or like a guy I spoke with a few months ago, he had it was a $100,000 increase. I think he had basically $100,000 invoice that he needed to pay. No real good explanation. If somebody is in one of those categories, what are the first few steps in your process? And then if you could talk about, sounds like you work on a contingency basis in some cases, which means talk about that. Let's a lot of people's question is, how much is this going to cost me? Mm-hmm. And so what does it mean that you work on a contingency basis?
It means that if we don't find anything, there's no charge. And we only charge typically as a percentage of recovery of whatever we get back or like reduce in your current policy. And then any future savings are all yours. So if we give you a new way of classifying your business, we'll go to the insurance carriers, make them correct their audits, and they will typically send you a check back, or sometimes they'll credit your current account if you're currently with them. And we'll go in, we'll contact the insurance carrier, and we'll get those mistakes corrected. Sometimes it's a fight. Sometimes we'll need to go to NCCI and go to a little NCCI dispute resolution hearing. Usually not. Usually once you have the documentation and you can show that you're right, the insurance company, they'll play fair with it if you point out their mistakes. And to get started the process, we're happy just to look at policies and documents and see if we think there's anything there. And it's very similar in terms of getting started on the hourly fee. We've got a large audit bill. We will first look through your documents and see if we think we can help you before we, actually send you over a contract. Our first rule is do no harm, and we only want to get hired for companies that we think we can help. Sometimes there's companies where we review everything and there's nothing we can do. And in that case, there's no charge. But the first steps in the process is send us over your documents. We'll take a look at it and let you know our thoughts.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, that's what I like about what you're doing. Several things I like about the way you guys are operating. One is you're helping people to get money back from billion-dollar insurance companies that are just making mistakes. And it sounds like putting a lot of strain on businesses, and in some cases, putting small businesses out of business because of a clerical error. So you're helping people optimize their overhead, stay in business, and then you're doing it on a contingency basis. So you're basically saying, hey, we want to help you, and you only pay us if you get paid. And I've been referring my clients to you for a few months now. And every time I share it and I ask, hey, would you be interested in looking at this? And people say, what's the worst that's going to happen? The worst case is you find out that you're paying exactly what you should. And but if you're in one of the 25%, or if you're one of those folks who've received a shock audit, this giant invoice, then I think the first step would be to do that. So if you're interested, I've set up a page. One of the things I'm really focused on this year is overpayment recovery. So if you want to overpay, or if you want to recover those overpayments, there are some specific tax credits available to you. And if you are interested in seeing if your workers' comp company, if your insurance company is overcharging you, you can go to constructionleadingedge.com/recover, RECOVER. Put your information in, and I'll get you connected with Scott, as well as a few other tax credit recovery specialists. And I kind of like this idea. I think this is a movement that I can get behind, helping people get money back from big insurance companies and the federal government. So, Scott, thanks so much for the work you're doing. Thanks for coming on here and talking about how people can save money. And I appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. I have one challenge and one request for you before you go. Here's the challenge. What is your 5-minute action item from this podcast? In other words, what is one thing you want to implement in your business or on your projects that will take you 5 minutes or less? My challenge for you is to create an action item as soon as this podcast is over and do it. Send yourself a text, send yourself an email, put it in your planner, write it down in your unicorn journal, whatever it is, but take action on something from this podcast episode so you get some real value from it. Now, here's the request. If this podcast has been valuable to you, please leave a rating and a review. Here's how to leave a review on Apple Podcasts on your iOS device. Number 1, open up the Apple Podcast app. Number 2, go to the icons at the bottom of the screen and choose search. Search for this show, Construction Leading Edge. Be sure to click on the show, not the episode. Then scroll all the way down to ratings and reviews, and finally click on write a review. These instructions will also be in the show notes. If you could leave a rating and a review, that would mean a lot to me, and it also helps get the word out there to other folks. And don't forget, if you want to get out of your business and make it run without you this year, go watch my free online training workshop at constructionleadingedge.com/get out. That's constructionleadingedge.com/GETOUT. Thanks so much for listening. My name is Todd DeWalt. I'll see you next time. Remember, every project starts in the field, and Raken's field-friendly software makes documentation easy. With Raken's mobile app, crews can document progress on the go, and you can track everything in real time right from the office. So, give your field crews an app they'll actually use and stay on top of all your projects. To learn more, go to rakenapp.com. That's RAKENAPP.com.